All right, I believe the recording has just started. So as I'm sure you are all aware from the email that was just sent out, that this video will be replacing class for what would have been today, Thursday, November 10th. And so if you're watching this ahead of time, it's obviously not November 10th, but um, this will be replacing class on Thursday. So remember, do not come to class in person on Thursday, or else no one will be there. And so today, for today's lecture, we're going to be covering the rest of chapter 11, and some concepts that you should know. Just a quick reminder that things from today's video will be included on the test. It's just like a normal lecture. There'll be bits from today that are important for your upcoming exam, which isn't for a while, but just so you have that on your radar. Another thing is, remember that tonight, Thursday, November 10th, that there is the first digital dialogue discussion due for this. It's there, it's posted in Learning Suite on the schedule, and then like normal, your responses are due next week. Also remember that this Saturday night, you have another thought paper due. So just so you're aware of all the different things on your plate regarding this class, those are just some heads up. But anyways, without further ado, we'll go ahead and continue on with where we left off on Tuesday. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Here we go. Should be able to see that now. Let me make sure that this is out of the way. Okay. So where we left off, we had just talking about general motivational theories, and then we also touched on hunger as a motivating force. And so we're going to continue with sexual motivation. And so with sexual motivation, obviously it's not something that on an individual basis you need to survive. If someone goes their entire life without having sexual stimulation or having sexual intercourse, they will not die from that. However, as a human species, if all of a sudden sex were to not happen, then humans as a species would die off. And so that's why within our brains, it's something that's so hardwired, and there is such a motivational force behind, because it's necessary for us as a species to continue to survive. And then as well, just so we talk about some of the hormones, testosterone is considered to be the primary male sex hormone. While it is included in females, it in males is what in the development of the fetus is what causes male sex characteristics to develop. And then it also through puberty, an increase in testosterone in boys as they turn into men is what causes their sexual development changes to occur. And then for females, the primary sex hormone is various estrogens. This is actually something that was news to me. It's not just a single estrogen, but there are multiple chemicals that fall under, or hormones that fall under that category. And so we're gonna go ahead and jump onto the, let's see, next slide here. And so many of the things that we talk about today, we'll just briefly mention how there are many conflicting studies that are out there. And so the only thing that we're gonna really touch on are things that are concrete and hard set facts. And so in terms of sex hormones, there are many studies that are being done out there to see how different levels of sex hormones, how that has to do with your mood, with how you act, and just different things like that. But there's no real set conclusive evidence or overarching statements that can be made for everyone regarding these hormones and their levels within each person. However, there are some things that we know for sure about sex hormones, and that is that they do increase when people go through puberty. You'll see an increase in sex hormones there, as well as in older people and elderly, sex hormones begin to fall later in life. And then also surgery and drugs can cause hormonal shifts within our sex hormones. Let's see, we're gonna go ahead and move forward with sexual motivation. So there are three main categories that we're going to touch on here regarding sexual motivation. And the first one is biological influences. And those are things just, sexual maturity, meaning the stage you're at relative to going through puberty, where you're at in your stage of life and your age and things like that. That is something that is essentially determined by your sex hormones. Your sex hormones will determine what level of sexual maturity you're at. And because of that, that will determine just how your hormones play within your body, how they play and carry themselves out. And so those sex hormones and their levels is essentially the biological influence for sexual motivation. Another thing is psychological influences. We're not going to go into extreme detail on that. If you want, there's more information about many things regarding that in the textbook. But for our purposes, it's sufficient to say that psychologically speaking, an influence is just being exposed to stimulating conditions, as well as there are sexual fantasies that people do have. And so there's more information about that in the textbook if you'd like a resource for that. And then the third one is social cultural motivation. And so that roots from family and societal values, religious and personal values, and then cultural expectations in media. And so this isn't just things that motivate you for sex, but this or give you sexual motivation, but it can also be something that does the opposite. And so many times people who, let's say, have a certain religious background, they are more likely to abstain for sexual relations until they are married. And there are also just various different things all listed here of how those can play out. In media and in certain cultures, it is a lot more acceptable for people to cohabitate before they're married and things like that. And so there are just so many different aspects that play into that. But that is all covered by social cultural influences. We're going to briefly touch on sexual orientation. And so with this, there are a lot of studies being done out there regarding sexual orientation and its origins. And quite honestly, it's unfortunate at how many claims are made as to where sexual orientation derives from, without any hard-cut conclusive evidence. There's still many claims out there that exist that have no real, origin of where those come from. They're just statements made by people. However, what we really do know at this point when it comes to sexual orientation and where it derives from is that it's likely a combination of factors, both some nature and some nurture. How that's exactly combined and how that plays out, we're still not entirely sure yet. But one thing that is of note is that in terms of nature, at least, there is one study that has picked up some traction, that it could potentially be related to prenatal hormone level. So that's something that basically, the level of hormones that you have while you're still developing within, as a fetus. And so that is what we'll cover on sexual orientation. If you'd like more information there about the various studies that tend to conflict one another, there's more information of that in the textbook. So that's basically for sexual orientation, all that we're going to cover. We are going to go ahead and jump into affiliation, and that is the need to belong need. And so there's some interesting things about affiliation and that need to belong. And so basically, we touched on this in class on Tuesday about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in that hierarchy of needs, there is that need for belongingness and love. And so essentially it's an emotional extension of the need to feel safe. And that's something that will occur. It's as humans, we feel safer in packs. Many psychologists believe that to be drawn back from our ancient ancestors who may have lived together in more familial group settings, and with that protected them from potential dangers. And so when we don't feel affiliated, or we don't feel like we belong in any one space, that can bring on physical pain. I know for me, there's specifically one time in my life when I felt like I didn't really belong anywhere, and I felt ostracized, and we'll touch on that briefly here shortly. But essentially, without a true need to belong, we can physically feel pain. And psychologists believe that physical pain that we can feel, despite this being an emotional response, we feel physical pain because it will alert us as humans to decrease certain threats, and that includes social threats, just like physical threats. And we mentioned this also in class on Tuesday, how there are many ramifications that we're seeing from the COVID-19 virus and pandemic, and how that lack of gathering as groups could have caused some real psychological damage for having humans not experience that need for affiliation, that need to belong. And so there are a lot of studies out there being conducted, both ones that have already been released from the past few years, but in terms of studies for long-term ramifications, that'll obviously take some time as the pandemic is more recent in nature. However, likely none of these studies will actually be true experiments, as it would be unethical to essentially force ostracism upon people to study them. And so that's one form of a COVID study that we're not necessarily ever going to see. And so also another thing with ostracism is that it's something that obviously it takes us away from that. We don't really receive that need to the need to belong. We don't have that. And with that, people who experience ostracism, they also begin to become more, tend to become more disagreeable, uncooperative, and hostile. For whatever reason, that's just something that psychologists have noted, and that can oftentimes lead to further ostracism. So sometimes it's a vicious cycle that continue to occur and spiral out of control. I'm going to go ahead and move over here onto the next slide. And so we're going to touch briefly upon social media. Similarly to many things we've talked about today, there's no hard-cut conclusive evidence about certain pros and cons regarding social media, just because it is relative in the history of the world, extremely new. We'll come back to some of the pros and cons here in just a second, but one thing that's interesting to me is that there was a 2019 study done that showed that college students on average spend 6 hours a week on social media. And if you include many people that don't use social media at all, that number is likely higher for the average social media user. And honestly, that might seem like a small number to some of you, but quite honestly, that's substantial. Even just an hour a day, that's a big chunk of time, really. And so within social media, it has shown that it can provide some positive outlet, in the sense that it can allow people to communicate and socialize, even when there is physical distance between them. So we saw many fruits of social media through the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw people still be able to, on some level, communicate and fulfill those social and affiliation needs that they may have. However, some cons have shown some decreased face-to-face socialization skills. And so there are pros and there are cons. I'm sure many of you guys can list out more, and there's more information regarding specific studies in the textbook if you'd like that, if you'd like to expound your own research upon that. Another thing that we'll briefly touch on is that social media has provided an outlet for many people that would be deemed narcissistic people, to thrive. And so just in general, narcissism or someone who's narcissistic, they're likely to think highly of themselves. They think that they're extremely important, and they focus on themselves, and they promote themselves. They're very self-promoting. And so social media has allowed it so that many narcissists are able to collect a lot of superficial friends. For whatever reason that may be, there are different theories regarding that, but it has come across as something that has shown to make those individuals thrive. And narcissistic individuals on some levels can be dangerous, not only to themselves but to others. So that's something that has definitely come forth as a con in some cases for social media. And then briefly here, we're coming to the end of slides, but we also do just want to mention achievement motivation. And so we mentioned this early in class Tuesday, and we said that we were going to expound upon this on Thursday, and this is us doing that right now. Essentially, in order to having achievements, it doesn't necessarily make us have a higher potential to survive. There are some people, some psychologists out there that would argue that achievement motivation, achieving something can be attractive, and so in some way, shape, or form is a form of sexual motivation, because it will in the long run help you find a mate and have posterity. And so there's that idea that you need to survive and reproduce. However, what we do know for sure about achievement motivation is that it can both come from intrinsic motivation, which is just this desire from within yourself to go out and achieve something, make something of yourselves. But then there also is extrinsic motivation. So if I'm at work and if I work extra, then I get a bonus, then that would be extrinsic motivation. That would be an external factor coming outside of me that would give me something in recompense for my efforts or my work to become something. That is an example of extrinsic motivation. And then let's see. Okay, yeah, in that case, that would actually cover everything that we have today for today's lecture. So I hope you've been able to enjoy the little break that you may have had from coming to class in person, and that you're all having a good weekend. Once again, if you have any questions regarding the material or anything, feel free to email your TA. I'd be more than happy to help you and clear up any questions that you may have regarding the material or anything with the course. But have yourself a great rest of your Thursday.